Hey guys, my name is Dan, and welcome to my first review here on my new channel, Under the Knife. To be honest, when thinking about what I should review first, I knew instantly it would be an anime, but I still needed to choose one. Over the past few weeks, I'd say it would be an understatement that I've been binging the hell out of numerous different anime series that I had never previously seen. And more than most mainstream TV shows and even movies, which I am accustomed to, I've found that a fair amount of them have been some of the best works of art I've ever experienced. So, I guess I got inspired. Inspired to talk about why I think these shows are so good and deserve to be discussed. And also, one of my friends recently started a channel with a similar goal, so I guess that kind of spurred me on as well. So, not to steal his thunder, but I'm going ahead with this anyway, because it's what I want to do. After brainstorming a name for the channel and browsing through Netflix, I found a show that I felt comfortable treating as my reviewer guinea pig, per se. And before I start, let me quickly say that I'll be trying to keep my reviews as spoiler-free as possible, but it is necessary to at least discuss the premise of the shows I'm reviewing. So, in an effort to stop rambling about this, why don't we jump into it? Let's put Season 1 of the 2018 anime series Violet Evergarden under the knife.
知らない言葉を覚えてゆくたび面影の中手を伸ばすのだけど一人ではわからないこともあるのかもしれないさよならは苦くて愛してるわ遠い匂いがした例えようも
Our main character in this story just so happens to be the title of the show, Violet Evergarden. So, suffice to say, there won't be any mystery as to what the title of the show means. Violet is a teenage girl who works out of the city of Leiden as what's known as an auto memories doll. Auto memories dolls are professional letter writers who make a living off of writing letters for people, mainly due to their exceptional skill in the art and ability to bring the words on a page to life, better than the average person could. Another aspect to the occupation of being an auto memories doll is the fact that they will literally travel to anywhere in the world at the request of the client to write the letter in person. So, as you can imagine, Violet spends some time traveling the world. Speaking of the world, we should probably cover that before we get too far. The setting is clearly portrayed as a twist on the early 1900s. In other words, it could be described as a sort of historical fiction, although they do throw some subtle fantasy and steampunk elements in to give the world its own unique flavor. Our main character, Violet, also happens to have prosthetic arms made of silver. If you couldn't already tell from some of the visuals you've already seen. However, I will refrain from telling you why, obviously, because that would be a major spoiler. So, by this point, you're probably wondering what type of story this is going to be. Well, if I had to pick a few words to describe this narrative, then I think I would have to go with the words that Netflix chose in their description, simply for the reason that they're pretty spot on. And those words are heartfelt, intimate, and emotional. I'll get into why these three words best describe this show later on, but keep those in mind for now. And one final thing to note before we get into it. This is not a show for all ages, as there are some rather graphic scenes, and the show does deal with some heavy themes. Anyways, moving on. One of the show's many strengths comes with its cast of supporting characters. It becomes apparent quite early on that development shown in these secondary characters is not only important, but critical to the objective of the plot and Violet's development as well. I ended up caring for most of the secondary characters that made appearances throughout the show, at least a little bit, and in some cases much more, even if they only appeared in a singular episode. Now, that being said, this is the type of show where we are basically following the main character the whole way, and I wouldn't necessarily categorize the secondary cast as mainstays per se, even if they appear in multiple episodes. This is very much an intimate experience between the viewer and Violet. And not to say that this is bad, because this is exactly what the show is trying to achieve, but it is something to note nonetheless. Now, when it comes to the way the show is paced, I'd say I'm fairly satisfied, but I do have one small gripe about it. Not to give anything away about the specific type of episode structure, but I think you could easily say there are two main types of episodes they use over the course of the 13 episode long run. I would categorize one type as main story episodes and the other as character building episodes. And given the relatively short length of the season compared to typically longer series, and yes, I do realize when I say this that this is only the first season, unlike the shows I'm about to mention, I still think the argument holds up, as I would not say this first season depends on there being a second season, even though it's basically confirmed that there will be. So, as I was saying, given the relatively short length of the season compared to typically longer series such as Kill la Kill or Death Note, for example, which have double or almost triple the amount of episodes in the case of Death Note, these shows have a lot more episodes to play with, whilst Violet Evergarden cannot waste episodes on filler, and it cannot format the episode structure in a way that detracts from the flow of the story. Now, what I mean by that is that there is a particular episode which in no way would I consider bad or unworthy of being part of the story, but would have preferred it to be in a different place in the story. Now, I'm obviously not going to tell you which episode this is, you'll have to figure that out for yourself. But in an effort to conclude my argument, other than that one point, I believe the show paces itself very well. And at the end of the day, that one gripe doesn't do much to hinder the story as a whole. When it comes to the animation quality of Violet Evergarden, I can easily say that this is one of the most visually pleasing animes I have ever watched. They really knocked it out of the park here, and the style they chose fits the setting to a T. I mean, just the quality of these landscape shots was enough to blow me away. I mean, just look at those. Look at them. Look at them! Do it! And also, I really need to point out something that, at least in my experience, usually doesn't get mentioned too much in anime. The lighting. Now, I wouldn't say this is particularly revolutionary in anime, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, as it adds a whole nother layer to many of the scenes. And finally, we get to the character design. Now, I don't have too much to say here other than the sheer detail of the characters is nothing if not commendable, and frankly top tier if I had to rank it. But let's be honest for a sec. You can really only get so detailed when it comes to 2D anime characters before it becomes a bit too much. So that said, this show strikes the almost perfect chord here. Except for one small thing. If this is their best attempt at a scruffy beard, I think we need to have a little chat with the artist, if you know what I mean. I mean, seriously, what the hell is that? Now, thankfully, they do prove they can draw a proper scruffy beard, but dude, that still does not excuse this. I mean, maybe it's just me, but whenever this guy was on screen, I had to put some extra effort in to ignore it. Anyway, enough of that. Enough of my rant about anime beards. Let's get to probably the most impressive element of this show, in my opinion. Okay, now let me be perfectly clear when I say this, and I do not say this lightly. This is one of the best soundtracks I have ever had the privilege of experiencing in my entire life. This soundtrack elevates this show in a way that can only be understood if you watch it yourself. The importance of the soundtrack is paramount to the profoundness of this show, and it has the ability to turn scenes which would normally be your plain old dialogue or movement scenes or whatever the scene is, into experiences which are so immersive they would send chills down my entire body in some instances. There is a sequence early on in the very first episode that illustrates this point better than I could ever explain it in words. And if nothing else, I just ask you to please watch the first episode and tell me if you experienced the same thing I did. And if you didn't already notice, yes, every piece of background music in this video is from the Violet Evergarden soundtrack, just to give you a little taste. Now, I could keep going on about this soundtrack, but this video is already longer than I expected it to be, so let's move on. Okay, so if I could say one negative thing about this soundtrack, it isn't even a problem with the soundtrack itself, more the sound design. I regularly found that the soundtrack would overpower scenes which featured the characters speaking. For instance, two characters would be having a conversation, and out of nowhere, the soundtrack just swoops in like,
"Surprise, motherfucker!"
and totally hijacks the viewer's ears, and all of a sudden you're having to listen extra carefully to what the characters are saying. And while you know the soundtrack is amazing, at the same time you're like, what the fuck, dude? Calm down.
Bruh.
And another thing with the sound design, when it comes to sound effects themselves, I wouldn't say they are necessarily subpar, but I did at points notice certain sounds that just seemed to not exactly fit what they were trying to portray. Now, I wouldn't say this hindered my experience much, if at all, but I felt it was a bit odd and definitely needed to be mentioned. And now this brings me to the very last part of the sound section, the voice acting. Now, before I get into this, I do have to mention that I am a dub watcher exclusively. Yes, I know you all hate me now, but that's just the way I prefer to watch, so you're gonna have to deal with it. And it's also the reason I'm keeping this particular section fairly short. Now, I typically don't have too much to say about voice acting in anime unless it's noticeably bad, but I do feel I need to commend the voice actor for Violet, as I don't believe there was one point that she disappointed in her portrayal. And in that same vein, I would not say that Violet is the most straightforward character to voice act for, so big props to her. Alright, now let's wrap this up. So, what kind of show is this exactly? First of all, let's bring back the keywords I mentioned earlier on in the video. Heartfelt, intimate, and emotional. To put in the best way I can without spoilers, it's a story about a few different things. It's a story about honesty, it's a story about coping with loss and appreciating what you have, and most of all, it's a story about love. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a love story. But wait, how does that last one make one shred of sense? Well, you know, you'll have to watch it yourself to find out. Now comes the hard part. What score does this season deserve out of 10? I would be lying if I said this show is transcendent. And from the numerous flaws I already pointed out, I think you know that as well. But furthermore, this show isn't one that's going to subvert your expectations in any drastic way. Not that it has to, but I find for a show to reach the level of transcendent, it has to either shock you in an unfathomable way, or it has to take you on a ride that you really could have never imagined. Violet Evergarden does not do these things. One last gripe I have with this show is that one major plot point goes unexplained, and the only reason I'm okay with it is because there is a second season coming, and that for the purpose of the story they are telling in this season, we don't really need to know that information. But even though this show didn't shock me to my core or take me for an unimaginable ride, it did have an impact on me. Violet Evergarden is a truly beautiful story, with a strong story structure, a well thought out cast of characters with good development, stunning animation quality and style, and my god, a soundtrack that is out of this world. So, given everything I have said in this video, I gladly give Season 1 of the 2018 anime series Violet Evergarden a rating of 9 out of 10. Amazing. And if you have the time to watch this 13 episode run, please do. You will not regret it. Thank you for watching my review of the first season of Violet Evergarden, my very first in-depth review. If you have the time, please comment below what you think about the video and whether or not I know what the hell I'm talking about. If you disagree with anything I've said in this video, that's totally fine. That's your opinion. Drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you are looking forward to more videos from me, and share if you know someone who may be interested in this type of content. I put a lot of effort into these, so I can't just pump them out every day, but I plan to regularly produce content like this. You can check out my Twitter at DanMan if you want to contact me directly or just drop me a follow to stay up to date with what I'm doing. Anyway, my name is Dan, and this has been the first installment of Under the Knife. Thank you again for watching, and I will talk to you all next time.